Hi, welcome. Welcome to Digital Inclusion 101. We're excited to have you with us. I'm the Executive Director of NDIA. My name is Angela Seifer. We got started about 7 years ago because there wasn't an entity representing digital inclusion work on the ground in the United States. And so now there is. The big things, the kind of big buckets that we do are that we help those digital inclusion programs talk to each other, peer-to-peer networking, best practices, that type of thing. There's lots of resources on our website. But then also we learn from those best practices. We learn from those folks on the ground and we try to influence public policy, sometimes successfully. So we're excited to have you here with us. We have a variety of staff. We're going to tell you a variety of things about digital inclusion and the resources NDIA has to help you. Just a quick note about the field of digital inclusion. It's been around a long time. We used to call it the digital divide. We would call it community technology. Some of you may call it other things in your communities, but it's always the idea that folks need to have access to technology just to participate, right? School, work, health, everything really. Talking to your mom, it all requires technology now. So our thought about all of that is that we want to make sure everybody can participate. And a big piece of that is making sure our most disadvantaged neighbors are able to participate. And that requires some work.
So those digital inclusion programs tend to be community-based organizations, libraries, housing authorities, local governments. It's the kind of work where they're making sure that folks can sign up for a low-cost offer, maybe subsidize a low-cost offer, or internet service in general, making sure that there's a device for that household to use. A mobile phone is insufficient. We all know that, right? Like we have to have more than that, but where are those devices coming from? And then the digital literacy skills. So who's providing that tech support? Who's providing application support? Who's helping guide a household into making all the choices like, okay, I need to purchase broadband. I don't know what to do. So these digital inclusion programs are the ones that make sure that they can, they have the resources to help folks. Sorry, I backed that up. We work on resources to make sure that they can do it as they need to do, because there aren't enough of those resources right now. This is just a quick NDIA. We have about 600 some affiliates now. These are these local programs around the country. Folks come to us. We haven't had resources to go look for programs. So it's a free to join. We have lots of resources. As you're thinking about goal setting and thinking about the ways that we can help you, to be thinking about what it is why it is you want broadband, right? And then what the barriers are to that broadband. So making sure that folks can participate in society, the economics, the education, the health, right? All the reasons why someone has to have access to the broadband. We often think of it as broadband as the tool. None of us are like, ooh, broadband, that sounds great, right? We're like, oh, I want to talk to my family. Oh, I need to take classes online. Like these are the things we need to do with this really important tool. And so what we would like to help you to talk through is what are those end goals? What is it that you want to make sure everybody can do? And then talk through, okay, what are the barriers to that? And how is it that we can make sure that you're utilizing any existing assets? When we first started NDIA, we realized we need to create definitions of digital equity and digital inclusion. And that has proven to be a really good idea because we use these a lot. So digital equity is the goal. This is where we want to get individuals and communities have the service they need so they can fully participate. They have everything they need, right? That is the goal. The digital inclusion is how we think about is the how. So this is the activities that would get us to that digital equity. And these are the items that I mentioned earlier, that it needs to be affordable and in the home, right? Sitting in a library parking lot, insufficient. So affordable home broadband, appropriate devices, because the mobile phone doesn't always cut it, digital literacy, who's providing that kind of support in a community, tech support, because things break, and then the applications. When the American Community Survey is a census, I don't know what it is actually within Census, what they call it, initiative project. So that's a survey within Census. And what they do is one of the questions they ask is who has wireline home service. And we use wireline, which is cable, DSL, or fiber, because if we think about mobile service or cellular service, there's a data cap on those. And so we want folks to be able to do whatever it is they need to do. So that means not dealing with data caps. So when we look at these numbers, 36 million US households do not have a service into their home. So we usually think of that as a subscription. And so it's not that the internet isn't available. It might be available, but they don't have a subscription into their home. And this is that example that Chris was given about Baltimore, that so 26 million urban households don't have broadband in their homes. This doesn't mean that it's not there. It means they can't afford it. They don't know how to use it. For a variety of reasons, they don't have it in their home. And that's what was happening in Baltimore. So 10 million of the households that haven't adopted is the word that often gets used, are in rural areas. We know that availability is an issue, but the point that we want to make sure to get across is that availability is a problem, but it's not always the only problem. That we also need to be making sure that we're addressing the other barriers to adoption, which is affordability, digital literacy devices.
So when we're talking about who's digitally excluded, that group includes those that are low income. And so based on data from the American Community Survey, 36 million households in total are without wireline internet access. And of course, this wireline internet access means fiber, DSL, and cable. So 26 million of those homes are in urban areas, while 10 million households are in rural areas, making up a total of 36 million households. Further, what we have also seen is that U.S. households that do not have a computer tablet in the home, and this population makes up over half of U.S. households without a device of any kind. According to the Pew Research Center, the communities that have the highest percentage of being offline, again, are low income. Low income meaning less than $30,000 a year annually. This also includes those who do not have a high school diploma or GED, and demographically Black and Latino families. In our white paper, limiting in NDIA's white paper, limiting broadband investment to rural only discriminates against Black Americans and other communities of color. We highlighted the excessive focus on broadband deployment into rural areas and the lack of focus on all other communities and all other causes of home broadband non-connection, especially the cost barrier, affordability. We've argued that this policy framework ignores a lot of the nation's unconnected households and have only minimally impacted on the most serious effects of digital exclusion in the education, the job market, healthcare, civic and social equity. The last major barrier to digital inclusion is digital literacy. For example, we've learned from the National Skills Coalition, who is one of our affiliates, that Black workers comprise 12% of all workers, but represent 15% of those with no digital skills and 21% of those with limited digital skills. And as we know, digital skills are becoming more and more important. So to recap, the barriers to digital inclusion include affordability, availability, and digital literacy. So what we basically see that is that there's a direct correlation between the income and home broadband adoption, and that affordability is a major barrier along with digital literacy.
So this really, the idea of redlining and digital redlining really builds upon what Sean was discussing, that idea of availability and affordability. Redlining is a term that has its roots in the post-war America. It's the systemic denial of various services or goods by either federal government agencies, local governments, or the private sector, either through directly or through the selective raising of prices. So what this means is that in the 1950s, it has its roots in discriminatory practices in industries like banking and housing. This resulted in historically segregated cities. That's why you see sometimes like the east or the west side or the north or the south side of a city. When we talk about digital redlining, we're introducing this idea of broadband availability into the conversation. We define digital redlining as income-based discrimination against residents of lower income, usually urban neighborhoods, in the types of broadband services that an internet service provider can offer. This also filters into how an internet service provider invests in improved service in a given urban area. We think that giving a name to this practice gives workers like us and our affiliates the ability to demonstrate that availability and adoption to broadband is as much of a measure of community health as other categories like race, age, poverty, or income. NDIA has published 2 reports on digital redlining. In 2017, we looked at Cleveland as our study area, and we learned that that's how we first realized that digital redlining was happening. We found out through our network of affiliates that AT&T was preparing to roll out a low-cost offer in Cleveland. One of our friends at an affiliate based in Cleveland was an instructor doing digital literacy on the ground, working with community members, and they should have qualified for this offer. In other words, they were income eligible, but this person didn't have the minimum speed required to be able to qualify for this offer. Why was this? Our research and policy director at the time, Bill Callahan, he looked into the data and he wrote a report in which we found that AT&T just didn't upgrade its wireline, meaning fiber and DSL. They didn't upgrade their networks to communities that were historically underserved. Last fall, NDIA wrote another digital redlining report along with the Communications Workers of America, which demonstrated that AT&T, again, AT&T had made fiber in the home available for fewer than 1/3 of the households in its total network. So we're looking at ISPs just not upgrading their infrastructure, and the people that this affects the most are the communities that have always been historically underserved.
So in order to adapt to these challenges, NDIA has created several pages in response to the escalating needs for information. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen to give you a better idea of how to access these resources. All right, you should be seeing the NDIA homepage screen. So the first one that we're going to look at is the state and local government resource page. And the way you get to that is you will be clicking on our COVID-19 link at the top of the page in the white ribbon, which will take you to a list of our COVID-19 resources. Scrolling down until you see state and local resources and clicking on the red hypertext that says state government responses. And here you will see a comprehensive list of all our states that we've found information for that would allow our users to access the resources that are made available by each state. And the reason this is comprehensive is because we list all 50 states and their resources as opposed to simply listing states that have resources available. The criteria for this page dictates what is going to be found on this page. So at the top, you'll be able to see that this page details things like internet access, which is the expansion of free and public Wi-Fi, as well as information about free and low-cost internet options, rather. Device access, which includes funding and computer refurbishes. And then, of course, tech support, which includes tech assistance hotlines, digital navigator programs, as well as online digital literacy training programs. And similar to our state page, of course, is our local government page, which again can be found via the COVID-19 link at the top of the NDIA homepage. If you're on the state page, you can just scroll across and click on the local government responses link, which will take you to the local government response page. Similar to the state page, again, alphabetized list of resources that are available. But this time, instead of being on a statewide level, we zoom down a little bit and we look at it at a local level, so at a city and county level. So scrolling down, again, another alphabetized list detailing the resources that are available at city levels. Red hyperlinks will take you to additional information about those resources. And we will list these as we come across them. This or rather both of these pages are not the sole efforts of NDIA, but rather a public and practitioner assisted effort where we will go out and seek information, but as well as being pointed to various sources of information, whether via our listserv or direct emails to me. I will review the resources again via the criteria that you see here at the top of the page: internet access, device access, and tech support. And if it matches this criteria, it'll find a place on this page.
You also might be thinking, well, what are some solutions or activities to achieve digital inclusion? Paulo, can you elaborate more on this?
Sure. Yeah, so earlier when Sabrina was defining digital equity and digital inclusion, she alluded to digital equity being the goal and digital inclusion being the solution, the necessary components to get to a place of digital equity. So I just want to dig a little bit deeper into those three legs of the stool. For review, one is affordable broadband, another one is affordable devices, and then digital literacy training. What do we mean by that? Think of it this way. Affordable broadband goes back to this idea of availability versus adoption. For instance, just because wires are in the ground for a household to get the internet, who is able, or more importantly, unable to pay? One way to address this is a discount internet offer that some internet service providers have. Think of Comcast Internet Essentials program. As far as the affordable devices piece, NDIA has within its network local and national computer refurbishers. I think in a few moments, Miles is going to go deeper into that on the free and low cost page. But there's also that elusive third leg of the stool, this idea of digital literacy. In other words, like training how to use these devices and training how to and how to navigate the internet. Think of it as that human piece of all of this. You need someone there sometimes to help walk through a form, maybe a vaccine form, maybe a job application. As far as these three legs of the stool goes, traditionally, a place like a public library, which has a public computer center, checks off all of those boxes. They have internet in the building. They have a public computer center, and also they have staff trained to help community members or patrons get to what they need. That's why on the NDIA's definitions page, we use the American Library Association's definition of digital literacy to frame our conversations and our work.
Of roughly 30 coalitions at this point. In April of 2020, we knew of about a dozen. Those dozen have the benefit of some support from us in the past. This very useful guide to coalitions, and you can find this on our website. Just go to the homepage, click on practitioner support, scroll down a little bit, and there it is. There is a downloadable PDF that's large for print and a small one that's small for the web. This was put together by Bill Callahan, Tianka Crocker, and Angela Seifer, our current executive director. So what do coalitions do? Like, why join up? Why do these matter? I would say, I just consolidated this for you, little cliff notes. They promote conversation, professional development, align programming in an area, and advocacy and education. They increase awareness of digital equity and spread current approaches to the work. Local leaders lend trust and credibility and a community-centric perspective to the work. And then in this guidebook, we talk about some hard questions also. There are advantages and disadvantages to the participation of local government or providers, ISP and mobile. The guide also covers starting and building a digital coalition. Trying to move this out of the way a little bit. There. So some good, just concrete tips, like potential coalition members. If you're not really sure, we've got some information that can help guide you in that right here. Guidance on like early summit production, like a lot of coalitions like to kick it off with a gathering of some sort. Co-creating your coalition's purpose. And we've got examples from existing coalitions, like this one in Kansas City that has been around for actually quite a long time, like 5 or 6 years at this point. So they've encountered a lot of, you know, common challenges and figured out some solutions. We even cover, again, with some of the hard stuff, like main reasons why members come and then don't come, like what could be up for folks. So we have some great, let's see, under what digital coalitions do, some great tips on strategic planning, supporting how new strategic programs like align across many organizations. That's tricky. And how to go about getting a better understanding of a community's needs and resources. And then of course, tips on public education and advocacy. So that is that guide. I'll stop the share. We also have information on a couple, like a report on how coalitions have been doing during the pandemic. Again, supplied by Colin Rhinesmith and Susan Kennedy. I'll drop a link for the Benton reports. Basically, the Benton reports on how coalitions have been doing during the pandemic talk about how more education groups have shown up and more telehealth groups have shown up. And it confirms that digital inclusion or equity coalitions have generally been able to do more faster because they already have the relationships built. And I think that's a really important component, like where your relationships are at when a crisis strikes.
I've handed over to Paulo to also talk more about how digital inclusion programs have adapted during the pandemic.
Yeah, for sure. So Sabrina was describing one practitioner resource, the Coalition Guidebook, which is awesome. We have another practitioner resource that we call the Digital Inclusion Startup Manual. I'll go ahead and share my screen to show you how to get there, and then I'll describe what it is and what you can get out of it. So again, starting here on the homepage, digitalinclusion.org, there's a few ways to get to the startup manual. I like to go through the practitioner support icon because it's towards the top, it's big and obvious, but right now you can also find a direct link to the startup manual a little bit below under quick resources. So the startup manual is our guide for organizations and entities that want to start digital inclusion programming. The initial version of the startup manual was released in 2019. It was born out of conversations that NDIA had with our affiliates, figuring out best practices when running digital inclusion programming, how they got off the ground, as well as what works and what doesn't work. We updated this startup manual, or we published a revised version of this startup manual last September, because when March happened, a bunch of our friends out in the field had to figure out, how do we keep on serving our community? Everything is digital. A lot of our affiliates were used to working in a public computer center. They were used to working directly with their community members. So over the course of last spring and last summer, NDIA got our affiliates together again and said, okay, COVID is crazy right now, but for those of you who are continuing to provide services to your community members, what works and what doesn't work? The result of those conversations is this revised Digital Inclusion Startup Manual with the direct link up here, I believe has been dropped into the chat. We updated a few chapters last year in the Digital Inclusion Startup Manual, one of which is, pardon my scroll here, one of which is chapter 4 for digital literacy training. Right, to go back to this idea of someone working in a public computer center, like a library, or maybe like a smaller community-based organization that has computers, how does an organization stay in contact with its community members when everything has to be remote? This is something that folks are really, really struggling with. So we updated this chapter for chapter 4, got a big revision last year, again, reflecting our conversations with our community. I'm not going to dive too far into this, and sorry for my scroll again, but a table that I'd like to highlight in this chapter, a little bit more than halfway down, is a big but not exhaustive resource of free digital skills training materials. We've gathered these resources from our own internal knowledge, right? A lot of us at NDIA have been working in the field for several years, but we are also gathering these resources from our community. So you'll find links to free resources from organizations like the Public Library Association, Goodwill Community Foundation, Mozilla, as well as from some of our affiliates like Tech Goes Home and Community Tech Network, which have on their websites a robust set of materials, including curriculum development, self-guided resources, as well as resources for instructors. So if you or your organization, or if you know of an organization that is trying to get like something like a train the trainer model off the ground, this column for instructor materials is for you. It's sort of like a meta document saying like, okay, this is how you teach this resource. This is how we can get through it and track some growth with your learners as well. So that's the startup manual. And link should be in the chat, but I'll send it back to you for now, Michaela.
Yeah, Paula, so let's pivot and talk a little bit more about digital navigators and what they are.
Yeah, so Digital Navigators is another COVID-related program. Once again, like the startup manual, as NDIA was and is developing this model of digital navigators, we're being guided by our friends in the field who are doing this work off the ground. So as it stands now, the digital navigator model is fit for someone who works in a community-based organization, maybe used to work in a public computer center, and they're trained to assess a community member's need and competently be able to guide that community member towards resources that are suitable. This is based on just pure conversation. So this fits in the three leg of the stool analogy. Digital navigators really satisfies that human component. These digital literacy skills, or the digital literacy training, now takes the form of phone conversations, maybe a Zoom call or a Google Meet or a WhatsApp conversation. Either way, the digital navigator is trained to really build upon empathy, to be able to work with folks who may have a different background from them and be able to assess their needs to be able to point that community member or patron to resources that they need. This can be a staff member within an existing role in an organization. Maybe the digital navigator roles are sort of like a plus to existing roles, but we're also seeing digital navigators take the shape of volunteer programs like Peace Corps or AmeriCorps. It all really depends on what an organization's capacity is to be able to bring on new or existing staff. As far as existing projects that NDIA is directly supporting, we're supporting a program, a digital navigator programs with Rural LISC, the Local Initiative Support Corporation, in which the emphasis there is economic development across Appalachia as well as the South. So that's like one form that Digital Navigators is taking right now. NDIA is also supporting a project with the Salt Lake City Public Library with funding from the Institute of Museum and Library Services. In that model, where I think of that as like the public library version of this. There's so much that Digital Navigators work already has in common with public libraries. So we are working with the Salt Lake City Public Library to identify additional community-based organizations that serve underserved communities in Salt Lake City, so that we'll be able to target those who have been historically missed by utilities and projects. Just a few of the examples of the form that Digital Navigators is taking right now. It's certainly not everything that we're doing. And again, a lot of the work that we're doing, we intend to share out everything that we find, right? Like we want you to be able to go on our website and say, okay, this is the form that they're using when a Digital Navigator talks with a community member for the first time. This is a form that they're using when they're trying to assess skills. We're making all of that available to you so that you'll be able to use it, see it as a template, and figure out like, okay, this works here, this doesn't work here. So you'll be able to find those resources along with others through the direct link to the Digital Navigator model webpage.
Visualize the digital divide, and what data do you use to inform your work?
Yeah, so I love working with the data piece of this job. One free and easy to use tool to sort of visualize the digital divide was made by our friend Bob Balance. It's called Internet is Infrastructure. This tool pulls from data sources that we in the digital inclusion world like to reference. So we reference the American Community Survey data. We also reference the FCC's Form 77, which is data gathered from internet service providers. More of like a self-reporting from internet service providers on where they offer fixed connections. Our friend Bob Balance, who is at the Center for Internet as Infrastructure, developed this, again, free online tool that allows anyone to be able to pull data and create maps based on their research areas. So with that Salt Lake City project, for instance, we were able to whip up a pretty good map in 20 minutes or 30 minutes or so to be able to identify these are the areas of Salt Lake City in this instance that have been historically underserved. Let's try to target those communities and let's try to make sure that our program is intentional about uplifting them. That tool is free and I highly, highly recommend it because it's awesome and I use it all the time. But if you are, or if you know a data person already, then NDIA has a data and research page available through our website. So again, just to navigate with you how to get there, starting from the homepage, digitalinclusion.org. I think just like clicking on this data and research page, the big icon, easiest way to get there. And on this page, you'll be able to find probably a better and more succinct description of what I was just describing. You'll see some data projects that NDIA has worked on before. You may be familiar with our Worst Connected Cities project that we do every year. It's one of my favorite things to do. But also, you'll find a good description towards the bottom of the data sources that we like to use. American Community Survey, FCC's Form 77. Ways to use data. If you yourself are not already a data person, we recommend connecting with someone maybe at a local research university. Maybe they have maybe they'll be able to point you in the right direction. This goes back to what Sabrina was mentioning earlier about like this idea of like building coalitions, building communities. That's a great way to get started, especially if the idea of a data set is really intimidating to you, which it certainly can be. It's just like a lot. So I would recommend pointing folks towards this page and beginning a conversation there if you'd like to do some research into your community or into another research area that you're interested in.
As you were saying, some local governments have digital equity maps. Can you tell us more about that?
Absolutely, thank you, Michaela. And yes, many local governments have taken steps to map out digital inclusion data across their territories. through both static as well as interactive maps. And once again, to help illustrate that point, I am going to share my screen. All right. Okay, so an example of a static map may be found in New York's Digital Inclusion Strategic Plan. But of course, the first question is, how do I find the Digital Inclusion Strategic Plan for New York? We have a page called the NDIA Trailblazers, sponsored by Google Fiber. And the way you get there is by, once again, starting at home base, NDIA homepage. If you hover on what we do and scroll down to awareness, this will take you to a list of resources once we get there. Scrolling down, the fourth option. From the top, you'll see an icon that says Digital Inclusion Trailblazers. So clicking on that will take you to our Digital Inclusion Trailblazers page. So what is a Digital Inclusion Trailblazer? It is, as I mentioned, a Google Fiber sponsored page that is an honor roll call, a recognition of local government and their initiatives. And that is these governments that have kind of gone above and beyond their mandates with regards to finding innovative solutions in their efforts towards digital inclusion, which makes this a fantastic resource because the Trailblazers page serves as a cache of knowledge for these efforts and these innovations, as all the documentation that is submitted to NDIA as part of the Trailblazers project is stored on this page. These indicators represent the 6 variables through which digital inclusion trailblazers are assessed. And if you scroll down, you will see a menu with various check marks and plus signs. This indicates where an indicator by a trailblazer has been met, a trailblazing city rather, has been met. And if you hover over and click on one of these plus signs, I had mentioned New York, I'm going to use that option, and click on the plus, you will see a list of hypertext dropdown, and that is, those are all links to the documentation that this digital inclusion trailblazing city has submitted in order to meet the criteria in order to become a trailblazer. So I mentioned, and Michaela was speaking about maps. So we've got the static maps that are present in the New York master plan. And that would look something like this. Now, this is just one page of a very comprehensive document. And New York City's digital inclusion strategic plan has, in this instance, mapped out mobile broadband adoption in New York City. With the key on the left and the map on the right, we can see where mobile broadband adoption is low, medium high, and high. And as I mentioned, this is an example of a static map. Some cities have interactive maps, which is in itself, a very unique and fun resource to have in your arsenal. So I believe one example of that we can scroll down to was the city of Boston, if I'm not mistaken. There we go, third from the top. Clicking on that plus sign again, we see the hypertext that give us the documentation submitted by the city of Boston in order to meet the criteria to become an NDIA trailblazer. So if we went and clicked on their broadband map, after a little bit of loading time, we would come up with this, which is the broadband adoption in Boston and the related social indicators. This allows us to kind of zoom around this area, zoom into different census tracts, and then importantly, click on those census tracts and get percentages and numbers of households, numbers of households and related percentages with regards to broadband adoption in Boston. And again, a very handy tool if you're trying to get very low level, a very zoomed in picture of what digital inclusion looks like in these trailblazing cities. just with regards to becoming a trailblazer yourself, if anybody is interested in doing so, we have, as I mentioned, the Digital Inclusion Trailblazers page, the link of which will be pasted in the chat or has already been pasted in the chat. Applicants will submit an application in order to become a trailblazer. Status will be determined across those 6 indicators found at the top of the page, of course. Indicators are not, again, they are not a product of solely the efforts of NDIA staff members, but these are the products of our working groups, which include our digital inclusion trailblazers. So our trailblazers themselves work alongside NDIA to decide on how best to describe whether or not a city has met a particularly innovative solution and how to include that on our criteria for the Trailblazers page themselves. Again, I'm the contact person for NDIA Trailblazers. I will drop my email in the chat. It's also available on this website. And if you have any questions or comments regarding this particular project, please feel free to reach out to me. And then once again, and we seem to love doing this over here, I'm going to share my screen with you. All right, so starting at ground zero, we're going to go back to the NDIA homepage. You will find our free and low cost pages under the COVID-19 resource tab once again. So clicking on COVID-19, we'll get a list of our resources with regards to the pandemic. Scrolling down, it is the second option from the top, and clicking on the red hyperlink will take you to our free and low cost internet plans page. Waiting for that to load. So this page depicts the current offers from internet service providers that are intended to help low-income households find service at low or no cost. Information for these pages is, as with our state and local COVID-19 pages, sought after as well as crowdfunded. That is, we ourselves at NDIA go looking for this information, and our affiliates and friends and those who participate on our listserv will be able to send us this and say, hey, this looks like something that could go on your page, to which it will be reviewed and then added to the page itself. This page is meant to assist our digital inclusion practitioners, our community leaders, service providers, libraries, the media, as well as others who may be giving guidance to their clients and constituents. Excuse me, I don't know why I'm struggling to talk today. Individual households are encouraged to use a resource called Everyone On, the link of which will be dropped into the chat box. And looking through this, we would click once again the plus symbol similar to our Trailblazers page in order to find the attached information. That information being things like eligibility requirements, the type of service that is provided, whether or not you are seeking additional information, you might be able to find that under the tab that says more info. And so this would take users to what they might be looking for with regards to being able to assist the communities that they're working in or working with. And once again, I am the contact person for this page. I will be putting my email in the chat. It is also available on this page. All questions, comments, or if you perhaps know of a resource that should be added to these pages, feel free to drop me an email.
So when we talk about digital inclusion and those, all those activities that are in that definition, the first one is the affordable internet access. One of the things NDIA has done is created a list of free and low cost internet plans. And this is a tool we've created for folks like yourselves. So you can go on, you can see which internet service providers have which kind of plans, what are the limits to those plans, because none of them are perfect, as you would expect, right? There's eligibility limits, there's other limits, like maybe there's bad debt, if you have bad debt with them, so sorry, you can't get our low cost plan, things like that. So this tool is a tool that we've created for practitioners, for community leaders such as yourselves. And one of the most important things to note is that the trust, and this is kind of a theme through all of digital equity work, is that trust is essential. Because if you get this information from a non-trusted source, you're like, free, low-cost internet, sounds like a scam. No, thank you. So the trust piece is super important. Next. And then the next piece of it is the devices. Two of the common strategies that we've seen across the United States and local communities is to develop nonprofit refurbishing operations. Some places have this, and communities come together to help them scale up to do more with that, because that's also then it's an environmental solution also, right, for the area, dealing with computers that need to someplace to go. Refurbishing the equipment, but then also the other strategy that we've seen is purchasing devices in bulk. We saw a lot of schools doing this, and then we saw a lot of not having enough Chromebooks, right, because there was such demand during the pandemic. But still, it's a way to get a lot of devices at a lower cost. And then digital literacy training. Again, the trust piece to this is essential because there's lots of worries about technology, and you know all these worries, right? Like, people are going to steal my information, I'm going to break it. There's lots of reasons where someone's like, no, 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 no. And so being able to help them through all of those no's, because the reality today is that I don't know if it's a choice anymore, right? Like, we like to think, that we can disconnect, but how long can you really disconnect before life gets really hard because you're not connected, right? So one of the things that we have is our digital inclusion startup manual. Chapter 4 in particular is updated during the pandemic with lots of resources for digital literacy training. Often those trainings are occurring libraries, housing authorities, community centers, rec centers, places where folks would naturally be anyhow, which is the digital navigators model. This is a model that developed mostly during the pandemic, and it was something that was happening organically across the United States, where organizations that had provided digital literacy class trainings in the past were like, oh my gosh, how are we going to do this remote? And in the same kind of effort of figuring that out, also realizing the need to help in their community members with, how do I choose a low cost offer? How do I even find an offer? What can I afford, actually, is really the first question. What's out there? How do I get a device? Are there any programs that are giving out devices or have devices at a low cost? Who has training that I can go to? And during the pandemic, it was who has training that is remote. Right now, it's who has training. And so having a digital navigator is a person at a trusted institution that knows the answers to all those questions. It can help that community member. And then the application piece of that is really important too, because sometimes there's just one question, right? Look, I need to apply for unemployment like right now, and this website is driving me bonkers. Can somebody help me? Right? Those are those moments when we get really stressed because we have to figure it out, because our homes, our families rely upon that. And having somebody to turn to that you trust is really important. And that's what this digital navigator model offers. And there's lots of information on our website about digital navigators. It's all there for the taking.
During COVID, this field really started to grow and change and expand, which is very exciting. And so NDIA's role is to learn from those folks who've been doing it a long time, hear the new ideas of the folks who are starting to work on it now, and try to mesh them all together and help everybody learn from each other. One of the big things I think we learned during COVID was that we can't just throw free internet at people and think that we've solved the problem, right? It's more complex than that. And so we welcome you to join us in figuring out those complexities, right? What else is it? What is it about the device? What is it about the internet? What is it about digital literacy? What else, right? What are those other things?
So, like I was talking about before, the field is rapidly expanding, and now more than ever, there's a need to work together and organize, build with each other. And we want to elevate your work. We want to share models that you're doing that are working, and we want funders to find you. And we know that they look at our website, as do journalists. So as we've been talking about, we serve as this bridge to policymakers and the general public. And I think it's a pretty great community to be part of anyway. Really passionate folks. Miles, do you have some of the details, the basics for how folks can join us?
Absolutely. I promise there will be no screen sharing this time. So how do you join NDIA? How do you become a part of our community? So the first is to become our friend. And I must admit that when I said there would be no screen sharing, I did lie, because this is probably the best way to show you how to do this, is to go ahead and share our screens. So once again, starting from scratch, we're going to get to the NDIA homepage. There is a tab far from the left that says Get Involved. Hover over the Get Involved tab, scroll down to Join the Community, and you will reach our Get Involved page that gives you several options for communicating with NDIA, becoming part of the conversation. The first is you can, if you would like to just dip your toes in the water, sign up for our newsletter. It goes out every month. It is full of incredible information, resources, major events of the month. And in order to do that, of course, just click here and sign up. The next option is to become our friend. And that signs you up for both the newsletters, but also gives you access to the community listserv and community calls. And I cannot understate the just incredible work that goes on in both these platforms. Our community calls are held bi-weekly. We literally have hundreds of people on these calls every week discussing cutting edge developments in the world of digital inclusion. And then our listserv continues that conversation where we bring together people across this field for this very wonderful in-depth conversations, links to new resources, additions to our pages, questions that you might have for us, questions that we might have for you. And then our third option for joining the NDIA community is to become an affiliate organization. To become an affiliate organization means that you have access to the NDIA newsletter. You have access to our community calls as well as our email listserv. And you are also listed on the NDIA website as an affiliate. Your position is actually geo-tracked and marked on our page so that anybody that visits our page is able to click on this map and say, hey, there's an NDIA affiliate in my area. And before I go any further, I need to emphasize the fact these first three options are all completely free of charge. There's absolutely no payment involved in signing up for the newsletter, to becoming a friend, joining our community calls, becoming an affiliate. It is simply filling out a form and becoming part of our community. That being said, there is a paid option. It is called becoming a subscriber. You get all the benefits of the previous three mentioned resources. That is the newsletter, the community calls, and the community listserv. But you are also then invited to become part of our subscriber calls. And those are similar to our community calls, a little bit more of an in-depth look at what we are doing within the field of digital inclusion. These subscriber calls happen once a month. You are also first picked to be invited to our various NDIA working groups. We value your input. We want to hear what you think about certain things, and we, are looking to you for advice to some extent. It is not a flat fee. It is a sliding scale, as you can see. I'm sorry, have I shared my screen, or are you listening? You've been listening to me talk for the last, my sincere apologies.
Okay, Miles.
I'm going to continue that very briefly. This is the page I've been meaning to talk about. As you can see, newsletter, becoming a friend, affiliate organization, and becoming a subscriber. And as I was saying, subscribers, it's a sliding scale. Depending on the size of your organization, you will pay a $100 to $500 fee.
We have lots of conversations that take place. We want you to participate. We want to learn from you, just as we have others in the community who could share their knowledge with you. So welcome.